So, how do we get young people back to work? What the hell happened to 16 to 24-year-olds? I think you've got kind of a choice here. Is this group inherently lazy? Are they sick, and I mean ill? Are they confused, or are they lost? And it's bound to be one or two, at least, of those things. There are plenty of jobs out there. There are hundreds of thousands. I bothered to check. In fact, according to the ONS, there are 717,000 job vacancies in this country. But we're now looking at a grim figure of about 1 million young people out of work. 16 to 24-year-olds, they call Neets. These are those that are not in education, employment or training. And that figure, as I said at the beginning, it's increased by 195,000 in just under 2 years. I mean, something really serious is happening here. 2012, it was a little worse. 1.2 million of that age group were out of work, but that did follow the aftermath of the financial crisis, which was about 4 years before, but that was the knock-on effect. We understand now, according to reports, the Resolution Foundation are behind this, that most of those that are not working in that cohort, in that 16 to 24 group, it's due to sickness and disability, which now accounts for a quarter of that figure. But what about the other three? Everybody understands someone who's disabled that cannot physically work, and everyone understands someone who's got a mental health crisis that is so bad it precludes them from almost getting out of bed in the morning. But the Resolution Foundation found increasing detachment from the workplace. 60%, and this is perhaps the most worried, have never actually worked. 60% of 16 to 24 have never actually gone to work. 717,000 vacancies. What is going on? The biggest factor driving this increase among the young is, as I mentioned, apparently disability or ill health, but that doesn't account for all of them. How do we get young people back to work? I mean, this is a serious problem, and I wonder whether there's a kind of recalibration of kind of life almost. That in the intervening years of social media, 24-hour news, everyone navel-gazing, looking at posts from other people, how well they might be doing, getting a figure in their head of how long they'll have to work before they can even rent a house, let alone buy one, which used to be about 19 and is now about 39. Is it all of that? Is it the kind of... What's the point? Is that where we're at? Is that what 16 to 24-year-olds are thinking? What's the point? I'd love to speak with you if you're a parent of kids of that age group, 16 to 20. You're not really a kid at 24, but you take the point. What are they telling you in terms of going to work? Because I can imagine that we can very easily write this off and say, well, they're just all bloody lazy, want to lay on the sofa with their PlayStations or Xboxes, do that all day, get a little... I mean, you don't get loads of benefit in that age group, and some in that age group don't get any at all. So it's not just about that. And even if you did get some, you're just not going to get that much. It's not going to buy you much of a lifestyle. But if it's a case of going out to work 8 hours a day for a job you pathologically hate, and the option is to stay at home on the sofa, I think people years ago would have gone, well, that's what you do. That's the bit I think is now missing. That's just what you have to do, kind of sort of rite of passage, but in an unfortunate way. You've got to go through jobs and hours, and yeah, it might be mind-numbing, it might not be good, but it's the means to an end, and it will eventually I'll get a better job or I'll get promoted or whatever. That bit I think is gone. The bit of you just sort of have to grin and bear it. I think no longer are young people wanting to grin and bear it. That's the nearest I can get to this. I'm massively intrigued as to how we get young people back to work. I mean, it is not only disturbing to see a figure that big, it has huge impact on society, it has a huge impact on public finances. There's nothing good can come of this. You can't look at this. The only thing you can do is observe and wonder what the reason is. Is it down to being ill? Is it down to being lazy? Is it down to being confused? Is it down to being lost? And I think, my money is a little bit, I don't want to have too much sympathy if somebody is an absolute lazy old git, but I think it's just that idea that It's just what you do. You go to work, take a job, you might not like it, you just weather the storm. That, I think, is the bit that's been eradicated from the minds of a significant amount of young people. It's fair to say I work with a lot of people in that age group, particularly well, it's not 16-year-olds, but 24-year-olds, and it's not across the board, of course, but we have got 1 million young people who are not working, and 60% of them never, ever have. How do we get them back to work? 0344 499 1000. Let's get a word on this from Oscar Reddrop, former number 10 advisor to Boris Johnson when he was Prime Minister. Oscar, good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon, Ian.
I would imagine you were the kind of character, Oscar, much like my good self, that the minute you could get to work, you wanted to get to work, you wanted to start work, you probably worked for nothing in certain areas and eventually thought, yeah, that's the path I want to go in, but you didn't mind the graft that it took to get there.
Well, it's not quite as straightforward as that.
You were a lazy git, weren't you? You were one of the ones that you were a Neet back in 2010. You were that part of that cohort.
I was a lazy git, and I know people would think, you know, oh, he was, you know, he's a Tory, he worked with Boris Johnson, he probably went to private school, all the rest of it. Absolutely not the case whatsoever. I remember one day a family friend ran a construction company, and he very much clocked that I was a lazy git. Yeah. And he spoke to my dad and he said, I'm going to get him out with me over the summer. I'm going to pay him absolutely naff all, you know, about 50 quid a week or whatever. And I'm going to work him seriously hard. Yeah. And it's going to change him. And it did. And that was the most informative experience I've had in my life. I think for a lot of young people out there, I was really lucky to have that kind of tough love in a way.
And I think for a bit of that, doesn't it?
It does need a little bit of that, and it didn't have that. And even then, when I went into the more professional world, you know, wearing a suit like this and sitting in an office, you know, you barely pay, particularly in a city like London. You know, I was not to do a poor me thing at all, but I was sofa surfing. You know, I didn't have family in London. I remember sleeping in the office one night because I didn't have anywhere to go. I don't know if my employer knew that, but it's because you knew ultimately if I just put one foot in front of the bloody other, you know, something will click, something will get there. And I think, without being too philosophical, and we'll go into the policy maybe a bit, you know, we don't have apprenticeships, the Tony Blair hangover of just university at all costs. And so, you know, getting on the tools and, you know, learning a trade is seen as, you know, kind of a second, it is an ideal job or is sniffed at. I think that's a tragedy. But getting more philosophical, and it's funny, I actually talked to my dad about this. We now live, I think, my generation and beneath me, in this pursuit of happiness. There's almost an entitlement that life, you have to be happy in life at all times. And my quest in life is to be happy. If you spoke to your grandparents, Ian, or maybe even, you know, your parents, and, you know, you sat them down and said, are you happy? They'd look at you and go, what? I don't know. I don't
understand the question.
I don't know. I do life. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's rubbish. But you weather that storm. And I do think there is a problem with this generation, with a younger generation. They don't have that. And, you know, the idea of, you know, being a trolley person at a supermarket, they go, I'm not doing that. I'll get laughed at. What kind of a life is that? I want to be happy. But they don't make the connection that I do that for 6 months. I then, you know, I get behind the tills. I manage the supermarket. I then, you know, I elevate and I get on, like, you know, a regional level. And then all of a sudden I'm a success. I've made a success of myself. And I think we have lost that. I think governments have let people down. So I'm not going to kick young people entirely. Governments have let young people down in terms of the job market. I would even say the absolute kind of onrush of immigration is also a problem for young people, you know, in this country. You know, a lot of those jobs, you know, that kind of race to the bottom in terms of, you know, lower skilled, lower paid jobs that do operate as a starting point, you know, that's more crowded now. And then lastly, and this is the elephant in the room for me, it really, really is, and you hinted at it earlier, you know, and I referenced, you know, if you spoke to your granddad, you know, are you happy? And he'd look at you like you were a weirdo. What your granddad would have had is a set kind of progress in life, and housing is absolutely key to that. And, you know, you can make a really decent salary and still not have enough money to get out your mum's bedroom,
100%.
you know, out your mum's spare room, you know, and that is where society and that social contract for young people has broken, unfortunately.
Indeed. Well, the government do say they're on it, Oscar. Let's have a reminder what Rachel Reeves said. This was like a few months ago now. I don't know where they're at on it today, but this is what the Chancellor had to say on this very issue of getting people back to work.
We know that the welfare system is not working. It's not working for taxpayers, it's not working for our economy, and it's not working for people on benefits who are stuck on those benefits rather than being given the support to get back into meaningful work. Everyone who can work should be working, and this government is determined to provide the support as well as reform the welfare system to ensure that work always pays.
I said a second ago, Oscar, there are 717,000 vacancies out there. 60% of that group have never actually gone to work.
Which is utterly terrifying. And I get it, because if you can get to a point, particularly, you know, in that cohort, when you're tipping 23, 24, where you think, and you've never worked, and you kind of think, I never will. And it just becomes like taking that first leap is impossible. In terms of the welfare reforms that Rachel Reeves is like, Labour do not have number 10 and number 11 do not have the support amongst their own party to get that done. We've seen that already, you know, like so in terms of if you're listening or watching this and, you know, you really think the Labour government are going to crack down on welfare reforms ultimately to solve this problem, ain't gonna happen. Ain't gonna happen. And in fact, to be totally frank, the Tories didn't quite have the bottle to do it either. So, you know, it's not gonna come that way. I think, you know, apprenticeship driving and really put the government putting all their weight behind that is a very, very good place to be, and we should spend more time and effort on that. But secondly, you know, again, housing. You know, if young people could be, you know, incentivized and realize that actually it is not a dream world to have their own place, to call their own home and to start life, that having that start, I think we would start to see the problem change a little bit. And lastly, as someone I cringe at myself sometimes, but like, as someone who has had mental health problems in the past and maybe will always have them, I do think we are a bit too soft on it. You know, sometimes, of course, there are acute circumstances, as you reference, where you can't get out of bed in the morning and you're on medication and working is impossible. But for a lot of people, the discipline of work, the fresh air, the structure, meeting people, getting out there is the best medicine for it. And I don't think we have that conversation enough with regards to mental health.
Indeed. Interesting message from Jenny in Bicester, who says no one wants to employ youth with no experience, and you can't get experience because you have no employment. There's also that little sort of pincer movement moment, I suppose, in the journey that some people are looking to take.